Today's bonus episode is brought to you by the Ugly Girl Papers, or Hints for the Toilet. Glass and tin bottles hide snug in a case, waiting for a woman's daily ritual. She reaches for a bottle of ammonia and washes it over her face, careful to replace the delicate glass stopper. Next, she dips her fingertips into the creams and powders of her toilet table, gravitating toward a bright white paint filled with lead, which she delicately paints over her features. It's important to avoid smiling. The paint will set, and any emotion will make it unattractively crack. If you're wondering what today's bonus episode is all about, guess what, kids? I'm going to take you back in time to Victorian England, and we're going to actually look at a beauty column. And let me tell you something. I'm kind of confused as to what the fuck is happening in this beauty column, but we're going to take a look at it. Are you ready? Cosmetics of the era were plagued by caustic chemicals that could cause bodily addiction. And similar to today, the advice on how, if, and when to use these treatments came from the era's most popular beauty columns. One such column, it was from Harper's Bazaar, and it was called The Ugly Girl Papers, or Hints for the Toilet. It was written by a Mrs. S.D. Powers, a beauty expert of the time, and became so popular that it was republished in 1874 as an anthology. So The Ugly Girl Papers has the tone of a wise aunt with endless advice on how to solve your beauty woes. The article continues to say, in one chapter, Powers asks, "Is there such a being as a hopelessly homely woman?" It is a rhetorical question, and readers of the time would have known the author's firm belief that one could go from average to charming with just a few dress and makeup adjustments. So, according to Powers, women's beauty was an elaborate, skilled, and semi-secret performance. Everybody knows there are inventions and accepts them as such, like paste brilliance at a theater. So, continuing with this, Victorian beauty ideals were unsurprisingly obsessed with pallor, and this is what we mentioned back in episodes 5 and 6. Upper-class white women chased even whiter skin, a symbol that their privilege never left them working in the sun. It was all about how to make your skin more translucent. And Alexis Carl is a perfumer and lecturer who has researched Victorian cosmetics extensively. So there are two dominant makeup styles in the 1800s, the natural and painted. The ideals of natural skin care conjured images of the English rose, a wholesomely beautiful woman with good morals. So, but Carl notes it was understood that there was a lot of artifice going on. The painted beauty regime was seen as a bit risque. Oh my. These women were not hiding their artifice, nor their desire to be beautiful. Similar to the no makeup trend that exists today, because things haven't changed that much, the natural look was often achieved through unnatural preparations, many of them homemade, and many of them deadly. I added that bit. Modern beauty practices belie the roots of current ideals. A chemical called taraxacum is suggested as a sort of 1800 chemical peel by Powers, who says, and I quote, "The compress acts like a mild but imperceptible blister." What? And leaves a new skin, soft as an infant's. To keep the face fresh, she advises coating the face with opium overnight, followed by a brisk wash of ammonia in the morning. For the women with sparse eyebrows and eyelashes, mercury was often recommended as a nightly eye treatment, eradicating the need to use heavy makeup. And I quote this now, "The look of the consumptive was very desirable. The woman with the watery eyes and pale skin, which of course was from the cadaver in the throes of death," says Carl. To get this near-death look, women would squeeze a few drops citrus juice or perfume into their eyes, or reach for some belladonna drops, which lasted longer, but also caused blindness in the long run. Pale skin was encouraged with veils, gloves, and parasols, but could also be bought. Okay. Sears and Roebuck sold a popular product called Dr. Rose's arsenic complexion wafers, which were just that, little white chalk wafers filled with arsenic for delicate nibbling. They were specifically advertised as perfectly harmless. Arsenic, a natural metalloid found in the Earth's crust, is an extremely toxic compound that can be tolerated for a time when eaten in small amounts, and has occasionally been used in medicine. Long-term exposure, however, is extremely unpleasant. Nervous system and kidney damage, hair loss, conjunctivitis, and growths called arsenical keratosis plague the body along with, vitiligo, which causes pigment loss in the skin. Arsenic, which became addictive as a person's tolerance built, was used in as many forms as possible. Lola Montez, a Victorian actress and traveling beauty writer, wrote in her book, The Arts of Beauty, about how women in Bohemia, now a part of the Czech Republic, regularly bathed in arsenic springs, which gave their skins a transparent whiteness. She also warned of the price. Once they habituate themselves to the practice, they are obliged to keep it up for the rest of their days, or death would speedily follow. Though beauty-related deaths were not always reported as arsenic poisoning, it wasn't that Victorian women didn't know arsenic was toxic or addictive. It was not uncommon for it to be used as a poison by murderesses of the era, and by the late 1800s, arsenic was known to be a dangerous ingredient when used in dyes and wallpaper. The use of arsenic in small quantities for skin lightening was considered so effective that it continued for decades. The mentality associated with using dangerous substances was possibly rooted in the era's culture. Toxicity is one thing, but there was also a stream of mortality running through daily life, which is very true, and this is what Carl is saying. So Victorian life was full of everyday dangers beyond poison products. Diseases, fires, and electrical mishaps may have contributed to an obsession with death that made domestic dangers like skincare easier to overlook. While the skin remedies geared towards a natural look were dangerous, the painted ladies were hardly better off. Women who used these products coated their faces and arms with white paints and enamels in an effort to cover their natural skin tone and mimic an extremely pale complexion. These products were made from lead, which is corrosive. The more paint you wore, the more you needed to wear next time to cover your damaged skin. Vermilion, sometimes called red mercury, was a known poison and lip tint. Many advice columnists, including Montez, vehemently hated, as she would call it, enameling. This is what she wrote, and I quote, "If Satan has ever had any direct agency in inducing woman to spoil or deform her own beauty, it must have been in tempting her to use paints and enameling." This is what Montez declared. So, one painted woman, Virginie, I love how my pronunciation of things when it's in French changes completely. Instead of just saying Virginie, I'm like Virginie. So Virginie Gautreau, depicted in a black dress in Sargent's famous portrait, Madame X, was admired and hated for the sensualization of her corpse-like skin. Madame X would use indigo dye to paint veins on her arms over the enamel. She was highly skilled. These women were literally living pieces of art. While wearing the enamel, painted women had to keep a largely emotionless face against the risk that the enamel would crack. According to Carl, they made a concerted decision to paint rather than employ natural cosmetic methods, which were used out of sight and at home. Once you began to paint, everyone knew you did so, and in a social sense, you could never switch to a natural look. When read as a collection, beauty columns like the Ugly Girl papers have a strangely contradictory feel. Well, in one instance, Powers claims that ammonia is the most healthful and efficient stimulus for the hair, and in another, insists that to remove unwanted hair, all that is needed is a good application of ammonia. Youthful grace was emphasized until Powers herself aged, when she began talking of the beauty found in gray hair. There is nothing more beautiful than gray hair. There is a surprising amount of advice that seems comparable to beauty and health columns of today, including eating well, keeping fit, and developing mental health and a sense of self-worth. And at the same time, none of the above were optional lifestyle choices in the eyes of many beauty mavens at the time. The word duty comes up in these columns a lot, which I mentioned before. Today's consumers like to think they are savvier than the Victorians, were no better, actually, than they were. Of course, and there have indeed been some improvements. Ingredient lists are now a legal necessity. It doesn't mean that you can't, hide it. And contemporary wearers tend to approach makeup as a conscious method of self-expression and creativity rather than as a duty, which is very true. In some senses, though, it's hard to miss the parallels to contemporary beauty tips dispensed by blogs and vlogs and vloggers and bloggers, and the potentially risky treatments that wax and wane in popularity and endorsements. So how far have we really come?
say.